What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with our top 12 running backs for 2022 fantasy football. This will be part of a playlist that we're going to make for you guys. If you guys are cramming for your fantasy football drafts right now, trying to get as much information as you possibly can before your draft this weekend, we have made a playlist for you guys that'll have a bunch of, essential fundamental type of videos for you. But in today's video, you guessed it, we're breaking down our running back rankings, our top 12 running backs for 2022 fantasy football. As always, if you guys enjoy at any point, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're going to try and break down these running backs relative to their ADP, whether we're in or out on them, and kind of explain the rationale for the guys that we have higher than consensus and the guys that we have lower than consensus, because we're definitely not, on par with consensus by any means. So with that being said, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well. And yeah, you guys are going to find that out real quick, that our ranks compared to consensus, you're going to see a ton of difference. And the reason being, the way we profile, the way we want to structure our teams when we take a running back early, they need that elite ceiling. They need that potential to win our league. So you're going to see that reflected in some of our rankings. All of these guys are going for the most part in the first two rounds. So being selective and understanding, okay, if I am going to take a running back, does he have that league-winning upside? Well, we're going to break down the league-winning upside cases. We're going to break down the range of outcomes for all of these guys on today's video. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. Obviously, you guys think that we hate running backs, but we're selective to say it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Before we get into the video, guys, check out the pinned comment down below. Tomorrow is the last day to sign up on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE to be a part of the giveaway. We're giving away 5 free $50 credits to anybody that uses our code from August 20th to 27th. So if that interests you, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, it's a best ball platform. You're basically doing paid mock drafts where you can win up to $10 million in total prizes, $2 million to first place in Best Ball Mania 3. And by using code FSE, you'll get 100% back on whatever you put in. You'll get our rankings manifestos totally for free, and you'll also get a chance to win that $50. So check that out in the pinned comment if that interests you. But let's get right into the running back rankings. The first guy that we have a disagreement at 1. I have Jonathan Taylor. Danny has Christian McCaffrey at 1. I'll make the case for Jonathan Taylor, why he's my 101. One of the best running backs in the NFL. We all kind of know this. He led the running back position last year in breakaway runs, avoided tackles per attempt with 44.4%. He was top 3 in yards created per touch at the running back position. He has pretty much an untouchable workload as well once the Colts get to the red zone. Once they get to the red zone, they know their safest path of scoring a touchdown is giving the ball to 28, letting him pound it into the end zone. He led the NFL in carries. He led the NFL with 92 red zone touches last year. He checks all the boxes. He has a top 10 offensive line. He gets a mild quarterback upgrade with Matt Ryan coming in, replacing Carson Wentz, a guy that probably should check down a little bit more to him in the passing game as well than Carson Wentz did. He has very minimal concerns. The reason I have him over Christian McCaffrey is because he is the safer of the top 2 backs, and they both have a very, very comparable ceiling, I would say. Christian McCaffrey at his absolute nuts range of outcome has a higher ceiling, but I'm willing to sacrifice that 1 or 2 points per game type of output that I see for CMC being in his range of outcomes to get less health concerns and be able to sleep at night with Jonathan Taylor as my 101. But I have McCaffrey 102, so I'm very close with those 2 guys.
For sure. I'm going to make the case for McCaffrey as well. Again, if you want to play on the safer side, I don't mind with putting, obviously, Jonathan Taylor, an ascending 23-year-old talent who has shown to already be one of the most talented running backs at the position. No qualms if you want to take him at 1, but my first overall pick, Corey kind of alluded to, is going to be Christian McCaffrey, running back from the Carolina Panthers. Again, his ADP is currently the 2nd overall pick, RB2 off the board, and it's pretty simple to me. You mentioned, comparable ceilings. I just don't really view that to be the case, honestly. Like, if Christian McCaffrey's healthy, I think he's got a ceiling probably 1.3 times that of any other running back in fantasy football, given the fact that we've seen him go close to that 30 PPR point per game type of range. And it's pretty simple to me. When he's on the field, he is an advantage at the running back position, unlike any other advantage in fantasy football. And the games he played last year without leaving early, the 4 fully healthy games, he was able to put up 27.7, 24.7, 26.1, and 24.9 points with only 1 touchdown in that stretch over those 4 games. His last 2 fully healthy seasons that we saw him on the field in 2018 and in 2019 just so happened to be 2 of the top 4 seasons we have seen at the running back position in terms of best ball win rate. So in 2019, a 36.9 best ball win rate, where he put up a ludicrous 448.4 fantasy points. And obviously in 2018, going at the 17th overall pick, a 27.3% win rate. For comparison, Jonathan Taylor this past year, just about a 16.5% win rate. So we know if Christian McCaffrey is healthy, he is the clear-cut alpha dog at the running back position. And again, the only concern you could have with Christian McCaffrey is that fear of health, or better known as, fantasy football players thinking they can predict injury. And for me, again, CMC has that injury history, of course, but he has zero history of major injury. And that is critical. A lot of his injuries have been more so, ticky-tack stuff that we really can't predict on a year in, year out basis. So fading him outside of the top 2, in my opinion, is basically you admitting that you are scared to compete for the championship.
Yeah, and the disagreement that me and you have a little bit is that I don't think he can reach his 2019 ceiling of 30 points per game anymore. I think his ceiling is more so in the 25-26 range, which is obviously a phenomenal running back, and he's going to be a high win rate type of player. But I think Jonathan Taylor's high-end range of outcomes 24-25. So to me, it is a marginal difference between their high-end ranges of outcomes. And while Christian McCaffrey doesn't have any injury history of major injury, the amount of touches he has under his belt, it does take a toll on you, make you more likely to suffer those ticky-tack injuries that he's had in the recent years. So I do think he presents more risk than maybe you think, but I still think he probably has less risk than the overall general population of fantasy players probably thinks that Christian McCaffrey has injury risk for. So we know what those two guys can be at the top. Let's get into the next kind of tier of running backs. I view pretty much every running back from running back 3 to like 13 in a similar tier. Maybe you can make the argument in certain scoring formats, like in full PPR, guy like Austin Ekeler, who is our RB3, might be a tier ahead of some of the guys behind him. But with Austin Ekeler, you got a guy that finished as RB2 this past season on the back of 20 touchdowns from scrimmage, 94 targets, averaging upwards of 20 PPR points per game and posting a 16.6% best ball win rate. He's still tethered to what should be an elite offensive situation with Justin Herbert as the quarterback there, being an elite asset in the receiving game. Some people have talked about how they think Mike Williams and Keenan Allen maybe won't be as good because Keenan Allen's regressed to some degree. And I think Austin Ekeler would be the primary benefactor if something like that were to happen. We're a little bit worried about touchdown regression because with Austin Ekeler, we've never seen anywhere close to 20 touchdowns out of Austin Ekeler to this point in his career. He's been more of like the 6 to 10 type of touchdown area. But when you look at the peripherals, we know that this offense is going to be really good. We know he's going to be heavily involved in the receiving game. The primary concern we might have had was that, hey, this Isaiah Spiller kid they drafted in the 4th round might be taking away goal line touches. Sounds like he's dealing with an injury right now, potential high ankle sprain. And we know Josh Kelly and Larry Roundtree weren't able to take that goal line roll away from Austin Ekeler last year. So that kind of sullies those concerns for me this year in fantasy. Austin Ekeler is my RB3. I think he is, well worth a top 6 pick, I would say. I probably wouldn't take him much higher than that. I've seen him, take him 103, 104 area. I would rather take those elite wide receivers.
Yeah, no, you summed it up with Austin Ekeler. Obviously, if you were to project, what you want from a fantasy football running back, you want great offensive insulation. The Chargers are going to be a top 5, 6 type of offense this year. You want a great talent at the position because ultimately, yes, you want the workload, but you want a player to be able to capitalize on the workload. And I think inarguably, Austin Ekeler is a top 10 type of talent at the position. Not to mention, you want those high value touches, those high value opportunities. And you kind of mentioned it, 64 total red zone opportunities this past year, including autonomy on the goal line, including elite receiving usage. So with Austin Ekeler, I think, you're set on leaving a running back in the 1st round and you can't get access to Taylor or to Christian McCaffrey. I think he's a safe bet to be a top 5 running back yet again this year with potential to hit that 20 plus PPR point per game ceiling. So I have no issues with drafting this guy in the mid-1st round. Obviously, again, we would have talked about in our strategy videos. We still prefer those top 3 wide receivers and personally still have a guy like Davante Adams higher, but you're getting him 6th, 7th, 8th pick. I think he's more than fine price, more than fine value at that spot.
Yeah, exactly. So a guy that we don't have, relatively anywhere near where consensus has him. We have him at RB4. He is your RB3. He's my RB4. Saquon Barkley. His ADP right now is towards the back of the 2nd round. 207, RB11 off the board. And Saquon's got a pretty similar stink to what Christian McCaffrey has on him.
Yeah, it's funny because, with us, obviously, I'm basically representing, the high risk, high reward type of running back so far. And you're more so on the safe spectrum, obviously with Taylor and Ekeler versus McCaffrey and Barkley. But realistically with Barkley, again, the other funny thing is the last time we did our running back rankings episode, a month and a half or so ago, his ADP on Underdog Fantasy was the 24th overall pick. He is now currently going off the board as the 15th overall pick, and I expect him to be a first-round pick come early September, when people are ready to start the season. I expect him to be, the 11th, 12th overall pick in fantasy football. No injury concerns from well-respected doctors in the space, including Dr. Edwin Porras, who's been on the channel in the past. So Dr. Edwin Porras, you get to see a couple tweets on the screen, but basically he said he believes, given injury recurrence and physical performance, Saquon Barkley is a safer bet this year than Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, James Conner, Elijah Mitchell, and even out-edges Christian McCaffrey in terms of safety from injury, if you will. Not to mention, again, he made a whole thread on why he is in on drafting Saquon Barkley at his current cost. So from an injury standpoint, he's basically clear to my eyes. If Dr. Edwin Porras is this strong in his belief towards a healthy Saquon Barkley being ready to start the season and being ready to get back to his full workload, I have no worries on my own part. Not to mention, again, throughout his career as a rookie, he averaged 23.9 opportunities per game. 2019, 22.3. He did miss, obviously, that 2020 season with the ACL injury. And first year off the ACL last year, battling that ankle injury in season, he averaged 16.9 opportunities per game across the year. But if you isolate the weeks where he was fully 100%, that number was near 20 opportunities per game. And now we finally get to see him with an opportunity to operate in the best offense of his career, potentially under Brian Daboll, with a threat, again, with Saquon Barkley, a threat to command 80, 90 plus targets if he is on the field, as probably the most proven pass catcher on the Giants right now. So yes, I am all in on Saquon Barkley. You get him as your anchor running back. He's, if you're picking at that 1-2 turn and you can stack up, Davante Adams and Saquon Barkley, good luck, because you're probably in a very, very good spot to win your league.
Yeah, exactly. He's a lot of casual fantasy players are scared off by the injury history. But again, we know from a medical perspective that it is tough the first year off the ACL tear to come back and be ready to go in 100%. And Saquon Barkley from weeks 2 to 4, like you said, was kind of showing that he was 100%. And then he has a freak injury against Dallas, and we're all concerned that he was never healthy in the first place, even though from weeks 2 to 4, he did show us that he was coming back from the ACL, could have been one of the first running backs to come back and be an RB1 in the first year removed from the ACL. Now he's 2 years removed, clean bill of health, as clean as it's ever been. And like we said, there's been some improvements in the Giants offense, could have a bit more of a goal line role. We know he's involved in the receiving game. We know he's a bell cow running back from a workload standpoint. There's not really any concerns I have with Saquon Barkley outside of, the recent history that he's been dealing with injuries, but that is, again, well in the rearview mirror with him second year removed off the ACL. We have Alvin Kamara as the next guy on the board here. It's, again, a pretty similar situation. I'm back on board with you, taking the risky running backs here, but Alvin Kamara at the 203 is where he's currently going, RB8 off the board. We have multiple reports now that he is unlikely to be disciplined from the assault that he, supposedly committed over the Pro Bowl weekend. A lot of people, I'm sure, are going to go to the comment section and say, well, there's a video of the assault that could come out at any point in time. If that's something that scares you off, then by all means, don't draft Alvin Kamara. But for me, I think the video would have came out already if we already knew that. It's been like 6 months since the assault happened. If there was going to be a video, I think the NFL would have dug into that when they were looking to suspend him in June or July, when they typically do their investigations. So I'm of the belief that the video is probably not going to come out. But if you're scared off by that, by all means, pass on Alvin Kamara. But this offense around Alvin Kamara improved a ton. Michael Thomas didn't play at all last year. He's coming back. Chris Olave was added to this team with a top 12 draft pick. We have Jarvis Landry as a third tertiary wide receiver who honestly was better than any receiver that they had on the team last year. And Jameis Winston's coming back healthy as well. And we know what kind of touchdown upside Alvin Kamara has provided to us in the past. I'm sure a lot of you guys won fantasy championships on the back of the 6 touchdown game that he had in week 16 2 years ago. Alvin Kamara needs a good offense around him to be the Alvin Kamara that we know and love. It's also a myth that Jameis Winston will not check down to him. On his 166 pass attempts when he was healthy last year, Alvin Kamara saw 34 targets, which was a 20.4% target share, which would have led the league ahead of already league-leading Alvin Kamara's target share from last year. So this dude commands targets because he's an elite receiver. It has nothing to do with what quarterback he had. It's not because Drew Brees was there that he was getting targets. He gets targets because, outside of Christian McCaffrey and Austin Ekeler, maybe those are the premier elite pass catching backs in the NFL. And Alvin Kamara, as long as he's on the field, as long as this legal situation subsides, is going to be a top 5 running back in fantasy.
Yep. No, you covered the whole basis on the Alvin Kamara argument. And realistically, with Alvin Kamara, I kind of mentioned it with Austin Ekeler, and they are very, very similar in terms of their projection. Great talents. Obviously, the Chargers offense is better than the Saints offense, but I think the Saints offense is going to be above average to potentially top 10 this year, given the personnel that they have, the schematic change that we could see with those receivers on the field fully healthy, and not to mention, he gets those valuable touches inside the red zone, inside the 5, receiving game. Alvin Kamara is one of the premier touchdown scorers at the running back position, while also being one of the premier receiving backs at the running back position. So with Alvin Kamara, we saw him nearly put up 20 PPR points per game in the games that Jameis Winston was healthy. And you mentioned that target share was still constant from what we've seen from Alvin Kamara in the past. So realistically, all the check boxes we needed to see last year from a performance standpoint were there for Alvin Kamara. Now, obviously, the legal situation is a bit murky, but again, you mentioned Adam Schefter fully believes that if anything, this is going to be an issue for 2023 rather than 2022. So if we have that type of confidence that he should be able to play this season without a suspension, he should be a first-round pick. People are still scared about the potential issue, but running backs are risky to begin with. Take the one with the highest upside. Alvin Kamara undoubtedly has elite upside as long as he's on the field. Clear-cut top 5 running back for me.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of mentioned, if you guys were curious, how high would we draft Alvin Kamara? Both of us have him ranked at 10. So we're okay with him drafting at the back of the first round. If you guys pick 10, 11, 12, we're cool taking him as our first player off the board at that 1-2 turn area. If you want to pair him up with a safer piece like Stephon Diggs in the second round to help cover your ass a little bit, then that definitely makes some sense as well. But we can move on to the next running back that we have here, probably a lot lower than many of you guys will have this guy ranked, or consensus has this guy ranked, with Derrick Henry, who's going off the board at 106, or the RB4.
Yeah, and the thing with Derrick Henry, obviously, I'll get into the performance, but it's funny to me that consensus-wise, people are more scared off of the situations of guys like Christian McCaffrey, guys like Alvin Kamara, guys like Saquon Barkley, but perfectly fine with what Derrick Henry represents. So I'll talk about the performance, because obviously the performance is fantastic. Second in opportunity share last year at 85.7%. First in expected fantasy points per game at 22, and 36 red zone touches in the 8 games he played last year, and wound up with 239 total opportunities in the 8 games he played. Obviously, that volume makes absolutely no sense. And he is one of the few running backs that is the complete focal point of their offense, similar to a guy like Jonathan Taylor. The problem with Henry, of course, as I kind of alluded to, is the fact that in his advanced age and workload and the style of workload that he gets, not even just the amount of touches he's gotten, but the potential, in between the tackles, grind the clock type of philosophy that he's basically shown throughout of his career. Well, it could catch up to him. And it probably did a little bit last year, given the drop in efficiency that we did see. So you guys would have saw that chart from Corey. Obviously, you did the full study on, potential running back age and touch apex. But with Derrick Henry, 1,500 total touches almost in his career, 1,400 of those being carries, 28 years old. Like, there is a ton of risk in that profile. Now you're combining that with the fact that he battled that lower body injury last year. He did miss half the season. And then from a actual team perspective, from a potential ceiling perspective, you're combining that with the loss of AJ Brown that could limit the Titans team scoring opportunities, which, as we saw last year, Derrick Henry had over a touchdown per game in the games he was healthy last year. If this offense isn't up to par with what it was last year, given the absence of AJ Brown, given the struggles at receiver we could see, I have really a lot of trouble taking him any higher than the back end of the first round.
Yeah, I'm totally on board. I think a couple of underrated things about the Derrick Henry outlook, because we have the outlook concerns that we have with him as a player because he's older, because of the touches. We also are not baking into the fact that the Titans offense is completely Derrick Henry right now. And not that defenses weren't focusing on Derrick Henry to begin with, but without AJ Brown on the field, they're only going to focus on Derrick Henry, right? And this was a team that won 11 games in 2020, won 12 games last year, was the number 1 seed in the AFC. Are they going to be that good again to the point that they're leading in all these games and that they can run Derrick Henry down their opponent's throat? I think that their game plan is going to be to try and win with Derrick Henry, but it's going to be tough. And we saw that with Alvin Kamara last year. When there's no other threats on the field, you're able to hone in on the number 1 weapon. And Alvin Kamara had his least efficient season last year because of that.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because with Derrick Henry, he had obviously an elite season, 24.2 PPR points per game, but he had 10 touchdowns in those first 7 games played. Given his nature, given his talent, given how he's used, he probably is going to be a threat to score a ton of touchdowns again, but being that he is an older running back, he doesn't get the elite receiving usage, and you're completely banking on him returning on that touchdown standpoint, he is just a much riskier profile to commit to than a lot of the running backs we've already talked about, specifically with the fact that Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara are currently going after him in ADP.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely do not disagree with the outlook with Derrick Henry. It's why we're a little lower on him. It's not that we're probably never going to end up drafting him because he's never going to fall to us at 11 or 12 overall where we have him ranked, but we're okay passing on him for those safer wide receivers. So for some of those upside running backs that we're going to take in that area of the draft, we just think Derrick Henry presents a little bit too much risk. And the same goes, but to the opposite side of the spectrum for Najee Harris, because with Najee Harris, who's the RB7 in our rankings right now, he is going off the board at 109 as the RB6. And last year, he had an untouchable workload, right? The best workload in the league, 23.6 opportunities per game, 5.5 targets per game. We have some whispers that they might dial it back a little bit. We don't exactly know how that's going to play out, but nothing's really changed. I'm not exactly concerned about his workload. It's still Mike Tomlin. He's a 240-pound bell cow running back. They're going to use him like a bell cow. I think the thing that I like about Najee Harris, and I think the bull case for Najee Harris, is that there's still plenty of meat left on the bone, right? He had a top 5 season last year as a rookie running back with the 30th ranked quarterback in PFF passing grade, with the 26th ranked offensive line. And I'm not overly excited about drafting Harris this year because none of that stuff has changed, really. I don't expect their quarterback play to be miles better than it was last year. I don't expect their line to be better than it was last year, but he is a little bit more of a floor play, which is why I'm not exactly excited about drafting Najee Harris. But the ceiling case exists that Najee Harris, as a rookie running back last year, just gets much better as a player and therefore can, withstand holding up that receiving workload, become a valuable target there, and also be a little bit more efficient. But the problem I have with Najee Harris, he's not a guy with breakaway speed that can create a whole bunch on his own. He's going to need the offense a little bit better around him to be able to cash in on some goal line opportunities. And we do have some concerns about how much these mobile quarterbacks are going to target him now, going from, stuck in mud Ben Roethlisberger to guys that can actually run.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with Najee Harris. I think he's, a fine player. Obviously, I'm a little bit lower on him than you are, comparatively. But with Najee Harris, you mentioned it perfectly. He's just not the archetype of running back I'm trying to draft in the first 15 picks of my draft. I think, if you're getting that 15th overall, 14th overall, actually, that's fine. But instead of having to take him there where I'm fine with it, you're having to take this guy, as you mentioned, 9th overall off the board when you still see that elite tier 1.5 of wide receiver with Adams and Diggs go around that range. So for me personally, because I view this tier of running back as such a flat tier, I would much rather just grab my anchor wide receiver and pick whoever is left in the second round, as opposed to taking my pick at running back and being left with, Deebo Samuel or Mike Evans, which again are not bad receivers, but definitely a tier down from the Diggs and Adams that I can get access to in the first round. So you mentioned it. He's a floor play running back. He's probably going to be a top 7, top 8 type guy this year. He's very similar, to be honest, in terms of archetype with what we saw from, prime Steven Jackson, where he's going to catch passes. He's a bigger running back. He's going to get a workload, but I just don't see that breakaway ability, and I don't see the Steelers being a good enough offense to support a bunch of scoring opportunities for Najee Harris. So fine with him, but just other backs in this range I would like better.
Yeah, exactly. For me, I would rather take Adams. I would rather take Diggs and then have Swift, Javonte, or Saquon fall back to me, where I have these guys all in the same tier, right? And Najee Harris rarely will fall to the second round. So that's why I don't end up with a ton of them, because he usually goes off the board at the end of round 1. And then in the second round, I just grab Swift, Javonte, or Saquon Barkley. And speaking of Swift, he's the next guy that we have on the list here. He is the 204 right now, RB9 overall in ADP, a guy that, again, we're okay just passing on Najee Harris at the end of the first round, grabbing a wide receiver and getting Swift in the second round.
Actually have Swift, that you guys would have saw, ranked straight up over Harris. So yes, I would much rather him at ADP at cost comparatively to Najee Harris. And reason being, I mean, he was nearly 20 PPR points per game and nearly 7 targets per game, an RB5 pace in terms of points per game prior to that week 12 injury on Thanksgiving versus Chicago, and was number 1 in the NFL in yards created per touch. You guys obviously would have saw that full breakdown of Swift on the contextualized game logs. If you haven't already, check the channel. It'll be up there, basically breaking down what he did when he was healthy. His path to elite fantasy production last year was that receiving work, playing for the 29th overall DVOA offense under Jared Goff and a first-year coach with perhaps the worst receiving core in the league. And yet, again, was still a top 5 running back in terms of points per game when healthy. Now I expect this offense to take that second-year leap. Second year under Dan Campbell. Second year with Jared Goff. Obviously, more receiving talent added to the team with DJ Chark and Jameson Williams when he comes back. I think that this offense can step from one of the worst in the league to potentially league average or slightly below league average. And if we're getting that on an already phenomenal profile, given the fact that we're betting on a talented, ascending third-year running back on, as I mentioned, an improving offense, he's got the opportunity to be a league winner. He's got the opportunity to command 20 opportunities per game and be a 100 target back across the season. So yes, I am fully in on DeAndre Swift as my hero or my anchor running back, especially in full PPR leagues.
Yeah, I've heard some people bring up the injury prone narrative about Swift too, because he's been injured towards the back half of both of the last 2 seasons. Again, that's the running back position. If you don't like running backs that get injured towards the back half of the season, you should be drafting wide receivers highly. So third year running backs are typically good archetypes to bet on to not get injured towards the end of the season, because they're younger. They don't have as much, carries and mileage under their belts. If you're worried about injury prone running backs, and you'll still draft Dalvin Cook in the same sentence, which is a little bit odd. So let's move on to Javonte Williams, who's the guy that we have towards back half of the top 10 as the RB9 in this list. We have Javonte Williams. He is going off the board at ADP 212, RB13 off the board. So we are quite a bit higher on Javonte Williams. I've broken down the long argument for Javonte. I'm not going to go completely into it, but the short version is this. He was extremely efficient as a rookie. He showed us a ton of what kind of player he can be. He was very, very good at breaking tackles and avoiding tackles, just like he was at North Carolina. As the season went along, we saw him take over the third down role, where he was getting he was running more routes than Melvin Gordon. He was getting the 2-minute drill work. He was getting the long down and distance work, which is really, really important if this offense is going to be very up tempo and playing in a lot of shootouts in the Chargers and, Kansas City Chiefs and the Raiders, the division that they're playing in. Many people are concerned about Melvin Gordon and the type of workload that he is going to get eating into Javonte Williams' touches. But we've heard a lot of smoke from Denver camp, from beat reporters, from Melvin Gordon himself, saying that Javonte Williams is the guy in this offense, and he's competing for touches behind Javonte Williams. Plus, we have Javonte Williams last year as a rookie running back in a bad offense who was able to be a mid RB2 down the stretch once he was able to command some more work. Like I said, as a rookie in a bad offense, the addition of Russell Wilson to this offense alone should help, provide you with a, mid RB2 floor. And not that we're drafting a running back for their floor, but I think people think that Javonte Williams' floor is like at RB27 when it's probably like RB15 in the offense that he's going to play in. And again, we're drafting him for the ceiling case that he is the guy and he's a top 5 running back.
Yeah, it's just so simple to me with Javonte Williams. And you mentioned his floor being about RB15. It's funny you mentioned that because post-bye week this past year, he's about a 15 PPR point per game player, RB15 across the season. So we saw his floor in a much worse offense last year as a rookie with a 57% snap share past that bye week. And he was still the RB15 in points per game. Now, again, you mentioned that significant offensive improvement, potentially digging into more of an opportunity share going into his second year, again, from Melvin Gordon himself, and having that, I wouldn't say autonomy, but advantage in terms of the receiving game amongst the running backs between him and Melvin Gordon. Like, he is the archetype that, maybe not full Jonathan Taylor from 2020, because obviously, again, I think Melvin Gordon's a better comparable player than Hines and Mack were, but even if you're betting on him and he becomes, 85% of what Jonathan Taylor was that year, I mean, that's still a phenomenal ceiling on what's a better offense with this year's Broncos than what the Colts represented in 2020, obviously with Russell Wilson at the helm for Denver. So I'm all in on Javonte Williams. You're getting him again. He's not looked at as an anchor running back because, again, he's going at the 212 where you could put him on McCaffrey teams, which is absolutely ludicrous if you can do that in your league. I'm fine with taking this guy in the top 15. I'm fine with pairing him with an elite receiver because I not only think he's going to pay off at ADP, I think he's got an opportunity to be a top 5 running back or top 5 overall pick by this time next year.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do in drafts is do a double hero RB where Javonte is the second running back, where he has just as much upside as my first hero. Where if I get a Christian McCaffrey, if I get a Jonathan Taylor, sometimes you can take Javonte Williams. If you get Ekeler at like 7, or if you get Saquon at like 8, you can grab Javonte Williams on the way back. And you have 2 guys that have 20 plus PPR points per game in their range of outcomes at the running back position. So I really love Javonte Williams. I drafted him in our listener league at like the 204 because I believe in the guy that much. So definitely put my money where my mouth is. The next guy that we're going to talk about is kind of in the vein of like Derrick Henry and Najee Harris, that we don't dislike their outlooks. We just have some question marks about them. And as a result, because they go a lot higher than the guys that we just talked about, we don't get a lot of Joe Mixon.
Yeah, with Joe Mixon, I'm glad you mentioned that. He's just not the archetype of player that I want to take, but I think he's a fine pick in this range. The offensive insulation in Cincy with full autonomy on the goal line at hand for Joe Mixon on what should be, as we mentioned with Cincinnati, a high scoring offense, potentially a top 5 scoring offense. Not to mention, Joe Mixon is one of the few elite workload, elite bell cow running backs in terms of usage in the NFL. He is someone, again, last year we were all the way out on, but I'm in on this year pending cost. Again, if he's going to be an early to mid second round pick, I am fine with that. I don't think he possesses, an elite level ceiling given the underlying efficiency concerns and a solid but not elite receiving role. But again, while this isn't a pick I'm overly excited about, I'm fine with it from a structural standpoint. What you guys would have saw on these strategy videos, typically in home leagues, I want to lock up at least one anchor running back in the first 2 rounds, given the running back dead zone, given the elite receiver value we should see between rounds 3 and 7. And if Joe Mixon is one of the last running backs of that flat tier I mentioned, and he's going at pick 15 instead of, DeAndre Swift, I'm fine with getting Joe Mixon there if he's the last of that tier.
Yeah, and back to the kind of injury point, people should have the same level of injury concern for a guy like Joe Mixon as they have for a guy like Christian McCaffrey. Joe Mixon has 1,100 career carries under his belt, man, and he hasn't averaged more than 4.1 yards per carry since 2018. So this is a guy, like you said, you have the underlying efficiency concerns where even though he plays in a great offense, even though he gets a great workload, we know his only path to elite fantasy superstardom is to score 15 plus touchdowns, which he did last year. So because he's not going to catch a ton of passes, if he was going to have a huge step in the receiving game, it would have came last year when Giovanni Bernard left the team. And he had 48 targets last year, which is not even a career high for him. So a guy that I think is fine, like you said, in the early to mid second round, I'm totally cool with him. If you want to go with a running back, favor him over like a CeeDee Lamb type or something, because you want to lock down a running back because you expect your home league to hammer out running backs after that, and you want to make sure you get yourself a double hero start or something like that. I'm totally cool with Joe Mixon there, but the problem I have with him, like I said, is the only path he has to an elite fantasy season is a lot of touchdowns, which is very possible in the offense that he plays in. But it does give him some risk. He still has the same risk of injury. He still has the same risk that he might not be efficient. He doesn't have a ton of receiving workload. So a guy that I would honestly, I have him after Joe Mixon, but I can make the argument to take Leonard Fournette
easily
over Joe Mixon, because at 301, where Leonard Fournette goes, I would much rather get Leonard Fournette at opportunity cost at the 301 than Joe Mixon at the 110, where he currently goes as the RB14 off the board. He's basically the same argument as Joe Mixon. He has high touchdown upside, playing in a great offense. He's a solid but not elite talent, just like Joe Mixon. They're both good running backs, but they're not like the best running backs in the league. Except Leonard Fournette saw over 6 targets per game when he was the starter last year, once he gained the starting role. And maybe Rachaad White eats into that. Maybe some of these offensive line injuries for the Buccaneers starts to pile up a little bit, and we lose some efficiency from Leonard Fournette. But I still expect him to be a 4 to 5 target guy. He's clearly got the trust of Tom Brady. I still expect him to have 12, 15 touchdown upside in the offense that he plays in, especially with Godwin coming back slow. No more Antonio Brown, no more Rob Gronkowski. Brady, Fournette, and Evans are the guys that I think are going to be the nucleus of this offense early on in the season. So Fournette has a little bit of risk with him because these injuries, and because he has, he's an older running back with a lot of touches under his belt as well. But for the most part, I feel a lot more comfortable drafting him at the 2-3 turn area than I do Mixon or Dalvin Cook at the 1-2 turn area.
Don't worry, we'll touch on the Dalvin Cook in a second, but I'm glad you mentioned it with Leonard Fournette. I feel like, he gets a bad rap because, in the past when he was on the Jags, people perceived his talent level as being lesser compared to some of these running backs in these situations. But as we know, running back is a situational position. Like, yes, obviously there's elite talents, there's good talents, and there's mediocre talents, but Leonard Fournette, despite being, one of the few workhorses in the NFL in terms of pure volume that he's seen in the past, he's getting a bad rap because of a terrible Jacksonville Jaguars team in the past. Now he's on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now we saw once he took over that full workload week 4 and on this past year from Ronald Jones, he was over 22 PPR points per game down the stretch in games healthy on the back of elite receiving and touchdown usage. The thing, honestly, even remotely keeping me from putting Leonard Fournette over Joe Mixon would simply be the presence of Rachaad White. But honestly, the more I look at it, I would just rather take the Bell case. I would rather take the bull case on Leonard Fournette, especially at cost, over many of the running backs we've already talked about. So the fact that you can get Leonard Fournette paired on the same team with Christian McCaffrey or Jonathan Taylor, given his current ADP, he's got the offensive insulation. He's got the receiving work. He's got the touchdown upside. He's got the workload. What, you're going to fade him because of grandma's cookies? Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the only real fade arguments you can make are the offensive line injuries, the fact that he's older, or the fact that he was out of shape in the offseason, or the fact that Rachaad White is there. They're all minimal concerns. I trust this offense and this coaching staff. We haven't even really talked about the fact that maybe they try and go a little bit more run heavy with Todd Bowles, who's a defensive-minded head coach. We don't really know if that's going to happen or not, but I think Leonard Fournette has a number of different cases to get himself into the top 5, which is not something, like you said, we can't really say that about Joe Mixon or Dalvin Cook. And Dalvin Cook, we can transition right into him. He's going off the board at the 108. You guys know that we're fading Dalvin Cook. If you guys are new to the channel, We put out videos, millions of videos, it feels like, about why we're fading Dalvin Cook. Check out the Sell These Running Backs Now Part 2 video for more in-depth look. RB5 off the board right now. We know what's in Dalvin Cook's favor. He's in a really good offense with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen on the outside to help generate scoring opportunities for him. But the real, pressing thing with Dalvin Cook is the, injuries that have piled up, is the, workload that he's had over the course of his career, is his tendency to suffer shoulder separations. And I'll let you kind of break down some of the things there.
Yeah, for sure. Before we get into the detractors, obviously the things working in favor for Dalvin Cook is the fact that he had a top 5 opportunity share at the position with 7 games of more than 20 carries this past year. He plays in a good offense and he has a featured role in the goal line. I'll give him his flowers for that. However, a lot of these running backs in this range are going to represent that for the most part. With Dalvin Cook, the issue why we're going to be out on him is point blank simple. It looked like this past year, the touches did catch up to him. Because in 2019 and 2020, Dalvin Cook ranked top 6 in both evaded tackles per touch and top 12 in yards created per touch. We saw both of those numbers this past year drop to 27th rank in evaded tackles per touch and 39th in yards created per touch. Many will point to, of course, the reason why he was so bad in fantasy was the fact that he had an outlier low touchdown rate that we've seen from Dalvin in the past, and that this year with that offense with Kevin O'Connell, he should near his career pass touchdown rates. But I just think that the risk is, point blank, maybe he's this year's Ezekiel Elliott. Maybe obviously with Ezekiel Elliott in 2019 to 2020, we saw, the signs in 2019 where the efficiency was kind of falling off a bit, and then it completely plateaued in 2020, despite a really good offense to start the year. Maybe we see that case happen with Dalvin Cook. He could have lost a step in efficiency. And for me, that risk of a worn down, breaking down type of running back like Dalvin Cook is too much to take over a guy like Stephon Diggs, to take over a guy like Davante Adams, given their crystal clean profiles comparatively to a guy like Dalvin Cook. And realistically, we just talked about Leonard Fournette. Outside of perceived talent level, what makes 2022 Dalvin Cook a better fantasy football pick than 2022 Leonard Fournette? Elite receiving usage for Leonard Fournette that Dalvin Cook simply has not been able to get. The offense, check. I'm giving it to Tampa Bay. Although I like Minnesota, I think Tampa Bay clearly has the better offense on paper. And not to mention, we talk about autonomy on the goal line, scoring opportunity. Yes, that's completely favorable thing for Dalvin Cook. But Leonard Fournette has just as much, if not more, with that Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense expected to be, as I said, top 3 to 5 or so in the league. So give me Leonard Fournette straight up over Dalvin Cook. One you're taking at the 108 right now, one at the 301, which oddly enough is the one I have ranked higher at 301.
Yeah, exactly. It really all comes down to cost with Dalvin Cook. I think he's a fine pick. I think if you're willing to pull the trigger at 108, he could definitely make us look foolish. And I think, going back, if we do our lessons learned video this time in, January and Dalvin Cook was the RB2 or RB3 in fantasy, I'm going to know why. It was probably on the back of like 20 touchdowns. And maybe he was just dealing with something last year and, he might be back to full health, but a 27-year-old running back with over 1,000 career carries under his belt who showed signs of decline, that screams to me, like you said, 2020 Ezekiel Elliott, which is why I am fading Dalvin Cook this year, as are you. The last running back that we had in this tier was Aaron Jones. You guys know the outlook by now. He's in what should still be a great offense with Aaron Rodgers calling the shots. Has a little bit more receiving potential with Davante Adams gone. But the reason he's at 13 and not in this top 12 for us is because he is splitting the backfield with A.J. Dillon. He is splitting the goal line carries with A.J. Dillon, a guy who outcarried him in the red zone in red zone touches last year. So that's kind of the differentiation between Aaron Jones and these other guys. But he is still in this tier for me. So if you said, I have Aaron Jones ranked RB9, I wouldn't really argue with you. I think that's a fine ranking of him. If you told me you'd rather have him than Joe Mixon or Leonard Fournette, I don't think I could argue with you too much, although I will take those other guys that we have ranked ahead. So if you guys enjoyed this video at any point, as always, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. As I touched on after the intro, check out the contest in the link in the pinned comment down below as well. Sign up on Underdog Fantasy and get your share of $10 million in total prizes, $2 million to first in Best Ball Mania 3. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up for 100% back on whatever you put in. And you'll also get our redraft rankings manifesto, our dynasty rankings manifestos, and our brand new redraft cheat sheet for you guys to be able to print off, bring your drafts, and check off the players as they go off the board, or you can use it digitally. And all of those instructions are in our redraft rankings manifesto as well. So with that being said, guys, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.